Welcome everyone. I'm Stephanie Somerville from the AusIMM in Melbourne, Australia. I would like to thank everyone for registering for today's webinar on the revised VALMIN Code. So now I'm going to pass over to Lou, the Chair of the VALMIN Committee.
Thanks, Stephanie, and welcome everyone who's registered for the webinar today. We're very pleased. We've had 75 people register for the webinar, and no doubt there'll be a number of additional people that come online during the presentation. My name is Lou Rosman. I'm the Chairman of the VALMIN Committee, and today I'm joined by Deborah Lord, who's a member of the VALMIN Committee also, and also Jonathan Bell, who's a member of the committee as well. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss the proposed changes to the VALMIN Code that have been put forward in the exposure draft that was released in mid-April. Everyone's had a good chance to have a look at that. Today is an opportunity for us to give you our view of the overview of what has changed, and also to answer as many questions as we can so that people have some of the information that they require to submit their submissions, which we're after by 17th of July this year, so we can incorporate that in a final version of a new draft code, a new code I should say. Jonathan and Deb are going to set the scene. We have a presentation of about 15 slides. There's not too much. The objective here is to have a Q&A with the audience, but John and Deb will talk to these 15 slides to set the scene, after which we'll have a Q&A. I'll join Stephanie, and we will vet the questions that are coming in and attempt to aggregate them so that the same question doesn't get asked over and over and over again. And between myself and Deborah and Jonathan, we'll make sure that as many of your questions are answered today. But the objective here is to get feedback. It's not for us to prove how smart we are by answering every question and answering it correctly. The objective is to get your feedback, and there will no doubt be some things that we can't answer today, and they're items that we'll have to take into consideration along with the other submissions that we get in July. We expect the webinar to go for about 45 minutes. We've set aside an hour, but 45 minutes I think would be an appropriate time for everybody on the other end of the line. So welcome, thank you, and I'll hand over to Deborah, who'll start the presentation.
Thanks, Lou. I'm Deborah Lord, and I'll be going through the first half dozen slides or so. And just while I have the opportunity, thanks to the AusIMM and the AIG for their support and assistance in running this webinar. So today I'll be running through initially a brief background to VALMIN for those of you that may not be as familiar with it. Then we'll talk about, I'll outline a summary of the changes before stepping through some of the more significant changes in the code. Hopefully that'll help you prompt a few questions. After that, John will be talking about what the next steps are in the consultation process before we defer to Q&A, questions and answers for you at the end of the webinar. So by means of background, the current VALMIN code is 2005. Since that time, many industry and regulation changes have occurred. We've been through a major boom. We've seen the introduction of JORC 2012, and all of those have impacted on VALMIN, and so that we've found some of VALMIN 2005 is now looking a little dated. So in the last 5 years or so, the VALMIN Committee has been working through all of these things and seeing how they impact on VALMIN, which culminated in a draft going out in late 2013, early 2014 to a limited number of people from the parent bodies. So I think it was about 8 or 10 people from the AusIMM and similar from the AIG. So there has been a round of exposure previously, and that the comments from that limited circulation were then incorporated into the current exposure draft. This exposure draft was put up on the AusIMM VALMIN website on the 14th of April, and the committee is looking for comments to be submitted by the 17th of July. So a summary of the changes that we see in the VALMIN exposure draft. are that the structure and the clarity of the VALMIN Code has been improved. There's been alignment and consistency developed with other regulatory frameworks, and in particular JORC 2012 and as a number of ASIC regulatory guidelines. There's also increased clarity around what is a VALMIN, who is a VALMIN practitioner, and what is a VALMIN specialist report. So when you look through those sections of the exposure draft, you will see some changes. However, the core purpose and principles of VALMIN remain unchanged. There's improved clarity around report types and the relationship between various reports, as well as guidance on valuation approaches and methodologies. These are not prescriptive, these are guidelines. However, it was felt that it was useful to include some guidelines. And finally, the VALMIN Exposure Draft is requiring greater transparency of the author, and in particular we're looking to include a clause that requires that fees for a VALMIN report be disclosed. I'll now summarise Figure 1. Those of you who've had a look at VALMIN Exposure Draft will see that we've attempted to capture the complexity of VALMIN and the framework in which we work, where VALMIN reports can end up and who their audience is, in a new figure. So this is proposed Figure 1 from the exposure draft, and that just tries to set some context for people as to how VALMIN fits into a broader framework. So now stepping through some of the major changes I introduced, VALMIN Exposure Draft has been substantially restructured in an attempt to improve the flow and the readability of VALMIN. We believe there's a significant improvement there, but you might struggle as you're comparing VALMIN 2005 to the new exposure draft. It's not easy to make a page-by-page comparison. So hopefully this webinar will assist you with that. And also I think that you'll find sections between the old and new codes are able to be compared. It also adopts a JORC type format in terms of there being code elements in normal text with guidelines in italics. You'll also see that there's some must-dos in bold font. Definitions are made once and they're clustered together in the back of the draft. So you'll see Clause 13 has most of those definitions, whereas VALMIN 2005 had a lot of the definitions embedded through the text. In terms of alignment and consistency, we now believe that VALMIN Exposure Draft has much improved alignment between the listing rules, the ASX Listing Rules Chapter 5, and really form a companion to the JORC Code 2012. We've attempted to make the VALMIN Exposure Draft timeless in a way, in that we've cross-referenced the JORC Code rather than trying to repeat word for word what is in JORC 2012, so that we're recognising that these updates may not synchronise. There's quite a few cross-references to ASIC regulatory guidelines. The previous VALMIN Code referenced these but didn't offer the reader or a new valuation practitioner much context for that. So we've tried to provide people with extra information, as well as cross-referencing to the PRMS, the Petroleum Resources Management System. They're just a couple of the places that we've looked for alignment. We've also delved into international minerals valuation codes and compared, and where appropriate, lifted information from those or referenced information from those. So there's the International Valuation Standards Committee, SIMVAL, the North American Valuation Code, SAMVAL, the South African one, and there's a draft International Mineral Valuation Code also that we've referenced. As I mentioned, the core principles of VALMIN essentially remain unchanged. So, like JORC, competence, transparency and materiality form the core. In addition, VALMIN talks about reasonableness and independence. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague John, and he's going to take over from here.
Thank you, Deb. So, starting off on the principles, we were very fortunate to have inherited a great code, and this draft is substantially different. That reflects the dynamic environment in which we operate in, crossing the financial, legal, and regulatory bounds. So, as part of the alignment thrust, we've made an attempt to bring us closer together to JORC, our companion code. So you'll notice that independence is now off to the side. It's no longer a pure principle. And the simple reason for that is that ASIC regulatory guidelines tell us when we need to be financially independent. We still need to be intellectually independent or objective in our assessments, but we delve off, we delegate the financial aspect to ASIC. Now, another element that comes into play is reasonableness. Now, this is because there's a greater emphasis, a push for a reasonable basis to a lot of our statements, moving away from subjectivity. And this brings the code into greater alignment with the Corporations Act. As we cross a number of domains, we're not just dealing with the technical aspects of a mineral project. We delve into value and price. You get all different groups involved. And the further you move away from the technical aspects, the more regulatory considerations you need to take into account. So as you move from technical assessment to valuation. In this draft code, we changed the terminology for the people involved in each of those steps. So we've aligned the terminology with the ASIC terms, ASIC regulatory guides. So it's no longer a VALMIN expert. We call ourselves specialists because that's what the ASIC regulatory guidelines refer to us as. The expert is the entity or person dealing with the securities aspect. Previously, specialists that used to help the VALMIN expert are called professionals. So this will be the lawyers and the accountants. So there's a change in terminology, but it's designed to reduce confusion as to who is the expert and what their role is. This process creates a clearer demarcation of the requirements as well. So if you're a securities expert, for example, you will need a financial services license. On the VALMIN specialist side, we still require 10 years, depending. And that depends on what you're doing. Because we're trying to align with JORC. So if you want to do a technical assessment without going into the value side, you just need 5 years. Why is that? Because JORC tells us we need 5 years to do a resource estimate or to be competent. So we're aligning with them. So not only can you do a Table 1 style document under JORC, you can now back it up with a full VALMIN style document as well. However, if you're going to go into the side of valuation, then you need an additional 5 years. And that's going to be contingent on your skill set as well. So it's not just a case of blanket 10 years and you can do both. You need to be able to demonstrate your competence in both fields. There needs to be a reasonable basis. This demarcation is also flowed through into the document itself. There's now greater segregation between the technical assessment reports and valuation reports. So as you read the draft, you'll see that we start off in the big picture aspect, and then we'll start talking about the technical assessment reports with very few references to value. And this is designed to help the people doing those technical assessments, might be the JORC end of the spectrum. They don't have to confuse concepts or delve into regulations that may not be applicable. If you are going into valuation, that's great. You read all that, come to the valuation, and you keep reading. So to make it more concise for the reader, they don't need to read the entire document and then absorb a lot of information that may not be relevant to the job at hand. We've also tried to apply more guidance where possible, deferring to the various regulatory requirements, other regulatory requirements. And we've mandated that we start disclosing what a report actually costs. And this is in keeping with the concept of transparency. You're signalling to the market, and it was already there. And it was a requirement under the securities expert requirements, ASIC regulations, that you disclose fees. So we're just aligning with that. It helps identify anomalies. You may notice that we've changed the definitions of value, be it market and technical. And that's because there are many definitions of value. And that's not unique to mining. The International Valuation Standards Committee is a group that covers all industry sectors of valuation, be it real estate, forestry, intellectual property. And they're trying to align on a global basis standard terms. And that's a huge task. So what we've done is we're sliding in with them. We're starting to use their terminology wherever possible. And that's important and advantageous because that group, the IVS, acts as a bridge between our valuations and accounting standards. So it creates a more seamless system. We've also taken guidance, initially out of Canada, on the type of approaches we use in our valuations and where they may be applicable or not applicable. The SEMVAL guys adopted this and we're following suit. That was a good idea, so that's praise. We've also given more guidance on the use of resources and reserves, particularly under the income approach. This is a complex area. And we've reinstated the prohibition of quoting in situ values. Transparency. Daylight is the great sanitizer. So we're really pushing for, if not, why not, as per JORC. We've touched on the costs. And we've also included, like JORC, a competent person styles disclaimer template. So what's the impact of this? Well, we're moving away from VALMIN being a code only for consultants by removing independence. So now people can do their own technical assessments and back up and inform the market with additional information. That is a good thing. This process has led to a greater differentiation between technical and technical and valuation reports, and a greater alignment both internally within Australia between the regulatory guidelines, JORC committee, and then other international norms. So what's next? Get involved, guys. That's what the next thing is. We need your help. This was done by a committee of volunteers. We're human. We need your involvement. Please review, make comments, get involved, submit via our website. And hopefully once we've got thousands of submissions, we're going to need help digesting all that information. So we're actually going to expand the committee as well to take on people. So there's another opportunity to get involved. Once that's all been modified, the draft code will go back to the parent bodies for approvals, and hopefully this will be released by the end of the year.
Thank you for that. We actually are going to open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, I do recommend that you put them in the question box, which is on your side panel. I can see that we already have some there. We're just going to review those.
And look, just opening up with the first question, and I'll put it to Jonathan. Jonathan, the question is, what does figure 1 mean? It really is a complicated figure.
That's right. And that reflects the notion that the VALMIN Code sits in a very complex juncture. if I may point to JORC, that's very mineral centric. But we have to take into account financial reporting requirements, and this delves into all sorts of regulatory guidelines. It is complex because we're dealing with law, we're dealing with finance, we're dealing with additional requirements. If we could make it simpler, we would. If there are suggestions to make it simpler, please let us know. But the purpose of Figure 1 really is to highlight to people that this is a potentially complex area, particularly in the valuation sphere, and we need to highlight that so people are aware when they're conducting work and don't inadvertently get into trouble.
So this is the slide that people that the questioner said was a complex diagram, and there's no question it's complex, but John's point is that the environment within which VALMIN operates is a complex environment, and it's essential at the end of the day to understand the diagram so you can understand the environment within which we've got to operate. There's another question here, and I'll put that to Deb. Is an independent expert the same as the person who can prepare a specialist report?
Thanks, Lou. No, there's a slight, quite a significant difference. Normally, the person that provides securities advice, so typically that is an accounting firm, they prepare an independent expert report, and they may not have expertise in preparing a valuation of an exploration or mining asset. So they would then contact a valuation specialist, and the specialist would prepare the valuation just on the asset itself, not on the security. So typically a valuation report would go into the back of an independent expert report, and the independent expert would take into consideration the valuation prepared by the specialist, which would feed into valuing the security.
Thanks, Deborah. And we have another question here, which I'll put to John. John, when is a report a public report?
It's a classic question. It's come up many times over the years. I think the first answer is seek legal advice. The informal John answer is, well, treat it like you would JORC. Would you give a third party a dodgy mineral estimate? No, you probably wouldn't. Same goes for VALMIN. If you give a report to someone else and they're going to make an investment based on that information, assume it's public.
A question here, Deb, I'll put it to you. Why are specialists not referred to as competent persons as per the JORC code?
Yes, that's a good question. I'll give my view. I don't know that we've come to an agreement really in terms of trying to put competent person into the VALMIN code, but I think VALMIN relies on a number of different disciplines, and you may not be competent in all of those. So we've tried to provide a description and a definition of the specialist who might take overall responsibility for the valuation, but also recognising that they may not be a specialist in all fields. They may need to rely on somebody else, a professional who is responsible and will take ownership of different aspects of the valuation.
And I'd add to that, the concept of the competent person is very much related to resources and reserves and geology, and probably more so mining engineering. But specialists in the case of valuations could be people that are experts in the marketing of a particular commodity or the processing of a particular commodity. So we're really delving into areas that don't necessarily lend themselves to classifying these folk as competent persons. We have a question here from one of our colleagues who I know is offshore. The 2015 exposure draft is titled Australasian, yet seems to have a very tight integration with Australian law, regulation, regulatory guidelines and institutions. And look, there is no question, and we won't shy from the fact that the primary guidance here is the system that we have in Australia that we know works very well. To the extent that we can, we've adopted things from South Africa and Canada where there are systems that we know work very well. As we all know, we're doing all that we can to integrate JORC and VALMIN into systems that are used in other countries. We've tried to use language in the way we've drafted the exposure draft that allows its application in environments that are not Australian environments. If there are any suggestions as to how better we can open up the language to make it clear that the process should be available to be used in other environments, we welcome comments on exactly how else we can open up that language. It certainly has been our intention. And I noticed that there's another question here that is along exactly the same lines. Jonathan, I'll put this to you. Could you please provide some clarity on what 5 years of valuation experience actually means with regard to VALMIN, SimVal, etc.?
Okay, so it depends on the type of value you're talking about. If we're talking about technical value, it's probably going to be need to be able to demonstrate an experience in doing capital cost estimation, for example. You certainly don't want a graduate going out there doing that. You need someone that's seasoned. If you're going to go into market value, you need to know something about market dynamics and market tension. So how do you do that? It's through guidance, demonstrated experience, just as you do with JORC. You need to demonstrate that you've been doing this for 5 years. You can work with people. They'll show you the ropes. You'll gain the tacit knowledge, the wisdom. You can build on that. And once you've hit that, you've got your 5 plus 5. Then you're competent in the full range.
Thanks, Jonathan. And there's a question here that I'll have a go at. Section 5.5, the heading says independent experts report / specialist report, hence the question whether these are the same reports. And I would point out in section 5.5, in the first paragraph where we're talking about an independent experts report, we're largely talking about a report about value of securities. In the second paragraph where we're referencing such a report, where we're saying it could be about technical assessment or valuation, we're specifically pointing out that it can be, in that case, just a specialist report being the technical assessment of, which may have components of the specialist report that then has to be reported into the valuation report for the independent expert. What is the intended outcome of the reduced requirements for independence? Jonathan, you correct me, but I think what we're really saying is that we're allowing the listing rules to determine when independence is required. In no way are we limiting how independent we should be when we operate.
That's right. It's there's a whole regulatory guideline, RG 112, that goes into independence from ASIC's point of view, and also it provides tests for independence. It talks a lot about the requirement of independent and how you can assess that. So I don't think VALMIN Exposure Draft is lessening the requirement for independence. It's just referring to ASIC's definition in order that there's not any confusion.
Do you need to do 5 years of valuation without actually producing a valuation report before you qualify to produce a report under the VALMIN Code? Can I ask John to talk to that?
Yeah, so this is following on from my previous question, that would be under the representative specialists section of the report, where you may have someone who has all the requirements and experience and knowledge, they sign off, and you may have done a lot of the work, they've kept an eye on you. The representative specialist says, yep, look, this complies, done sound work, and that's how you gain your experience. The last thing we want is people coming straight out of the field and going straight into valuations without learning the nuances.
I'm just reading two questions at the same time here. One question is pointing out that in a jurisdiction where there are no listing rules requiring independence, the code leaves the door open to people who aren't independent writing a report. And I suppose that's an interesting point and something that we should take notice of. So thank you very much for that point. I've got another question here, John. What is technical value?
Technical value. All right. So a good place to start with these concepts of value is perhaps going to the RBS documentation, and they lump this into three categories: cost, value, and price. Cost is pretty straightforward, operating costs, capital costs, and so forth. Value is often a product of those costs. What do you get out? It's a very, it can be an individual assessment. Everyone has different values. Something's worth more to one person than another. This might be a function of their wealth or their risk tolerance. Then there's market value, and that relates to price. And that's the likely amount that something's going to transact for. So it's not so much what it's worth, the value, it's what you actually pay for it. And there's a difference between value and price that gives us common language terms like cheap, expensive, and so forth. So technical value is the value, market value is the price.
Deb, one for you. The proposed code supplies guidance on valuation methodology. Where would a geoscience factored method fit into that methodology?
Yeah, so the guidance, and it is intended to be guidance, not to be prescriptive, I think is taken out of SAMVAL or SAMVAL. So that's based on a table that's come out of SAMVAL, and it does offer guidance. And in terms of a geoscience approach, I think it is a cost-based approach in that case.
Yep.
I have, and this is really getting out of VALMIN's domain, but I would refer the person that asked the question to go and have a look at the VALMIN seminar series, because there is quite a bit of discussion. There's detailed papers that go into that. So that those VALMIN seminar series, and there's been a number of them over the years, talk in detail about the various approaches and methodologies. This is just intended to offer some guidance towards that. Anything to add? Anyone? No.
There's a number of questions here, and a couple of them are rather long. That doesn't mean they're not good questions, by the way. And it's all around section 8.5 on the use of resources and reserves in valuations. And the fact that we're relatively prescriptively saying what can be used in a valuation. Now, I referenced the very table that we were just referring to, table 1, where we're specifically suggesting what sorts of valuation or approaches are appropriate in certain stages of an asset's life. And at certain stages, it is appropriate to use an income approach, and this is where 8.5 comes in, where you use reserves and resources. But depending upon the quality of the information regarding modifying factors, whether we've done scoping studies, pre-feasibility studies, etc. ASIC has been very, very focused on this particular issue over the last 2 years. And Deb referenced the dozen or so AIG members and the dozen or so AusIMM members that were asked to review the drafts in 2014. But in addition to that, we had very significant submissions from the Minerals Council and the ASX and ASIC. And what we're trying to capture and what we've written in 8.5 is a solution to the concerns that ASIC has, so it's clearly spelt out. And there have been many examples over the last 2 years of companies that have been forced to retract reports that have been written, statements that have been made, because ASIC don't believe that they're reasonable. And therefore what we're trying to capture in this relatively large section of 8.5 is what we understand from our discussions with ASIC, they will accept as reasonable. There's some interesting points in a couple of the questions that have been asked, and all I can suggest is we'll make sure that we take those points, we'll put them into our comments, and we take them into consideration when we're reviewing this exposure draft. And I do ask anybody that has any further comments on this issue, because it is an important issue and an important change. We're more than welcome to see what your suggestions are. But the questions are long, and I don't want to bog the meeting down going through every bit of it. There's a question here about, has there been any attempt to determine whether the Singapore and Hong Kong regulatory authorities will accept the VALMIN 2015 code provisions? Look, we haven't put a lot of effort at all into working with those two exchanges. We haven't got this through our own exchange. When we've got this through our own exchange, as far as I'm concerned, that's the backbone of the code, and we will then engage with Singapore and Hong Kong. Otherwise, it's simply trying to jump to the beat of far too many masters. It's already challenging enough.
And I may jump in there, Luke. While there is a lot of guidance to the regulatory system, there is a caveat to say that the relevant regulatory system and laws apply. So when it talks about Corporations Act, it'll be the Singapore equivalent that applies. So there is a mechanism within the code to deal with that.
One for Deb. What is the idea behind making mandatory disclosure of fees associated with a valuation report?
Yes, well, I think as John mentioned going through the slide pack, it is currently a requirement of independent expert reports through ASIC that disclosure of fees is included within that. So as a practitioner writing a specialist report to go in the back of an independent expert report, you were sometimes asked to disclose fees and sometimes not. I guess the idea also is that there's more transparency. You can make an assessment, I guess, based on the fees, how independent that valuation might be. Also, how much work has gone into it perhaps also. So it's really just aligning with the current requirements of independent expert reports and bringing that through into a VALMIN report also. Thanks,
Deb. There's a question here regarding Section 8.6 and the and ranges, and the question is Section 8.6. Often geology and grade has uncertainty. That's a large value range. Concerned at the inference that we need to get a type value, not a representative range. Guidance on what is so wide as to render conclusions meaningless. John, have you got a view on that? I haven't had a chance to.
Well, present. In my mind, I think of probability distributions. We deal in a world where you can get extremes in the outcomes. If you're dealing with the market value of something, what's going to transact for, it's probably best for going for the most probable and trying to gauge some sort of probability of falling within that range. Sometimes you get absolute screaming bargains, and other times you're left wondering how someone could pay so much. But it's not trying to cover the full spectrum, it's the confidence around the most likely sales price.
Deb?
I think also it can depend on the stage of a project. I think once, for example, exploration projects, really before you know what's there, the range of values can be very wide. However, I would also argue you should not try and make the range appropriate to include every possible outcome. So really saying that there could be nothing in this piece of exploration ground to it might host a world-class deposit, and associating a value with those two extremes is effectively meaningless. You've got to try and really narrow it down to what you think might be appropriate for the stage of the project. So an exploration target would typically have a wider range of values than an inferred resource. An inferred resource would have a wider range of values than something that's undergone a feasibility study. So
yeah,
I think,
and that's exactly, I mean, having had a chance now to reflect on the clause, that's exactly the point.
yes.
The tighter the application of modifying factors has been on the project, then the tighter and the tighter the range should be, and what makes the range meaningless, I think, is totally dependent upon the stage of the asset in the project, and someone else has come back here and said, look, leave the range up to the specialist, and look, we agree with that.
And again, being transparent in how you've determined that range, I think, is also really important, so that you know, when there is a wide range of values, there may be a difference of opinion. However, if you've been transparent about how you've estimated that value and not just reported it in there, that gives the reader, you know, an understanding of how that valuation range was derived and an ability to challenge that also.
Okay, and I think this is really of the questions that we have here. Given that there's a little bit of overlap between these questions, there's one last one, which is a bit of a trick question. Therefore, I'll give it to John. John, does materiality trump transparency?
Interesting. Well, we're joined at the hip. Materiality, the intent there is, if you leave it out, could you come to a different conclusion from reading the report? So you have to be transparent about everything that is material. And you can be transparent about things that are not material as well, as you like. I don't think, off the top of my head, that it's possible to pull the two apart. If you don't disclose everything that is material, then you're not being transparent, and vice versa. And that's the intent of the Venn diagram that we have borrowed from the JORC code.
Okay, Jonathan and Deb and Stephanie, look, that's the end of the questions that have come through to us. Well, there's a question here now from someone. A side-by-side comparison of the old and proposed new codes. Look, this isn't like what we did to JORC between 1999 and 2004, and largely between what the JORC committee then did between 2004 and 2012. We've substantially rewritten everything from scratch because we believed it needed to be clearer, there needed to be more clarity. But if you go to the contents table of each code and reference the specific areas that you want to look at, then we think that it's relatively easy to compare. But you can't have a side-by-side comparison of these two codes because they are structured in a very different way.
The other thing to note there is if you go onto the VALMIN website, you'll see there's a link to a document that you can make submissions to the VALMIN committee on the changes. And you'll see that the exposure draft code has been cut into sections with a box for your comments on that section. So if you use that as a template and took the old code, I think you would be able to cross-reference the relevant sections and make commentary there if you think something in the new code has left out something in the old version or vice versa.
Wonderful. Well, I would like to bring this webinar to a close and thank the committee members, Lou, Deb and John, on behalf of the AusIMM and its members, and for those who have attended today. I'd like to thank you and hope you've enjoyed the experience. Any additional questions that come through, I will pass on to the committee, as well as any further information will be included in an email, a follow-up email to everyone who is registered for today's webinar with a copy of the webinar and links to the important documents for submission, and you can always email back with any feedback or questions then. Again, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday, and don't forget to fill out the feedback, the questionnaire you will get when you exit from the webinar.
Thank you all. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.